What's going on, everybody? It's Joe, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeper Sunday. Sleeper Sunday, for those of you that don't know, is a series I came up with showcasing fun and hidden decks you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what can be done to make the deck better, and of course a few replays to see the deck in action. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the winner of this month's poll, Plunder Patrol.
Now, Plunder Patrol will be an archetype of mostly water fiend monsters released in Ignition Assault back in January of 2020, with our most recent support being from Photon Hypernova in February of 2023. Their depth into other attributes revolves around our extra deck, with each monster having a different attribute as well as different summoning mechanic, aside from the two synchros. This plays into their gimmick revolving around using their attributes of your opponent's deck to craft their ships to match. Moving on.
Sorry, something in my throat there. Moving on to the actual deck list itself, we're going to be starting off with 3 copies of Whitebeard, the Plunder Patrol Helm. He says, during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can special a Plunder Patrol monster from your extra deck with the same attribute as a monster your opponent controls or in their graveyard, and if you do, equip this card you control to it. If it's sent from the hand or monster zone to the graveyard, you can activate this effect. Special summon a Plunder Patrol monster from your deck except Whitebeard. Also, you cannot special for the rest of the turn except Plunder Patrol monsters. Now, Whitebeard shows 2 different attributes that the deck actually has. One being utilizing the opponent's attributes, funnily enough, to go into your extra deck monsters, and the second of which being an effect that activates if it's sent from the hand or monster zone, keep in mind, monster zone, to the graveyard. This is because they have another mechanic that we will be getting into later on that revolves around equipping the Plunder Patrol monsters to each other to get certain effects as well. This is probably like the weakest aspect of the deck, so that's why it's not really like super persistent, at least not in this build, but it is still one of the mechanics that the deck has regardless. Now, Whitebeard is basically like the bread and butter of the deck. He is a level 4 Fiend tuner that allows him to go into the Synchros, you can go into the Xyz, you can go into basically anything from the extra deck, while also having okay stats, the ability to survive on the opponent's turn to utilize its effect to tag out without having to hard make anything, and also easily having the best effect if it's sent from hand or monster zone to the graveyard. Just summoning any of your other good Plunder Patrol monsters from the main deck to your field is really great for extending your plays. And it's really good for getting access to Goldenhair, the newest Plunder Patrol, who, fun fact, is no longer the newest Plunder Patrol. She is also a tuner and says you can send another Plunder Patrol monster card from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard to special it from hand, or if it's in your graveyard, you can discard any card to special it, but you cannot special for the rest of the turn except Plunders. So Plunders do have a couple of different cards that lock them into just themselves, and it's mostly these 2 that are like the main culprits. The rest of them allow for pretty generic plays, and you can always do stuff beforehand. But Goldenhair is one of the best cards in the deck because it has multiple ways to get itself out of the hand or the graveyard without having to use your normal summon, and being able to put things in your graveyard such as your Whitebeard or some other cards later on that could be discard fodder, such as the Evenlys that you see here. Goldenhair also is a tuner, which allows you to, again, go into your synchro plays, and these 2 are actually the only tuners in the main deck, so they will be like the main things you'll be using to go into your synchro monsters if you're not cheating them out with their effects. We also have 2 copies of Bluebeard, the Plunder Patrol Shipwright, who says if you control a Plunder Patrol except Bluebeard, you can special it from your hand as an activated effect, and if it's sent from the hand or monster zone to the graveyard, you can discard a card and draw 1 card. Bluebeard's okay, admittedly. It sucks that his special summon is an activated effect, so it can get stopped pretty easily, and also it is unfortunate that you have to discard to draw. You can't draw and then discard, which means that a lot of situations, if you don't have any cards in hand, Bluebeard doesn't really do anything. It would be really, really good if you could like draw into like a Goldenhair or a Whitebeard and then discard it immediately after, but I guess you can't have everything, but he is still a pretty decent level 4 extender. An even better Plunder Patrol extender level 4, which is also their newest main deck monster, is Black Eyes, the Plunder Patrol Sea Guide, who says you can target a Plunder Patrol in your grave except Black Eyes, and special this card from your hand and add that targeted monster to your hand, and then this one does lock you into Plunder Patrol as well. I forgot to mention that. And if it's sent from the hand or monster zone to the graveyard, you can target 1 Plunder monster card in your spell and trap zone, and special it in defense position. The second effect doesn't really come up too often because you're not really focusing so much on the equip aspect, and when you are, it's with something like Blackbeard, which is a link monster that you cannot summon in defense position, so that's not going to be like super super relevant most of the time, but the effect to special it from hand and get a monster back from your grave is really huge, because a lot of the time you're going to be using some of the other stuff in the deck, such as the runic cards, which we will touch on in a minute, to discard Plunder Patrol monsters such as Whitebeard, and so you can go like Black Eyes, add it back to hand, and then still have that as your normal summon, or just to have discard fodder for your later effects. The final main deck Plunder Patrol monster is Redbeard, who has the exact same first effect as Whitebeard to special on the opponent's turn, but if it's sent from hand or monster zone to the graveyard, it gets to target a Plunder Patrol you control except Redbeard and equip it to it. This is one of the only things that actually like revolves around the equip mechanic that we do play, and so it does come up for certain effects such as Black Eyes, or for just using the extra deck monsters a little bit more efficiently, which we will get into when we get to the extra deck monsters. But other than that, he's easily like the worst one in the main deck, but we do play him because he does have some pretty decent situations and scenarios where he does come up. For the back row for Plunder Patrol, we're only playing one of each of Shipyard and Plunder Patrol Booty. Shipyard being their field spell that says Plunders gain 500 attack for each Plunder card in your spell and trap zone, which means they can get up pretty big if you have a lot of your extra deck dudes out, because that's like the main way you're going to have stuff equipped. It also says you can discard one card to add a Plunder card from deck to hand, except Shipyard, and if it's in your grave, you can target a Plunder Patrol card in your spell and trap zone, set this card, and if you do, return that target to the hand. This card overall is just really, really good, and it's only bogged down in this deck by the fact that we are playing the Runic engine, and we would much rather have Fountain 99% of the time. However, if you can get Shipyard in your hand first, or it's also just like a search target for the Mowork in the extra deck, which we will touch on, but if you can get this in your spell and trap zone first, you can easily get a bunch of different plays going, discarding things like Whitebeard or Golden Hair to tag out into other Plunder Patrols like Black Eyes, and then being able to reset it in a grind game is also very, very good. So if you do lose your Fountain, or if you feel like you'd rather prioritize the Plunder Patrols at that moment, being able to not only reset the Shipyard, but also return something in your spell and trap zone to hand if you have one is really cool. And then Booty is simply there because it allows you to change the attribute of a face-up monster your opponent controls. That makes a lot of awkward matchups where your opponent doesn't really have any attributes you would like to utilize. For example, in the Snake Eyes matchup, you don't really want to go for Bran half the time. You'd much rather go for something like a Mowork or a Lisp. You can easily change their fire into a dark or a light monster. Oh, and then I guess you can also take a Plunder Patrol monster from grave and either shuffle it into the deck or special it. This hasn't come up for me too much, admittedly, though it is a very, very solid addition to the effect. But then also during the end phase, if you control no plunders, you have to send it to the graveyard, which is whatever, I guess. As I mentioned, we are of course playing the Runic package, and that is going to take up a very large chunk of our deck. I think it's like a whopping 19 cards or something like that, so like half the deck is just straight up Runic cards, but that's because the Runic engine works so well with the Plunder engine. Being able to consistently draw cards to keep your Runic extra deck monsters alive, sorry, not Runic extra deck, Plunder extra deck monsters alive, because they require Plunders in your hand to use their effects. Being able to also discard them off of Hugin in order to trigger their effects such as Whitebeard and Golden Hair. Very, very good. And then also, it just gives you a consistent way to continuously draw into your Plunder Patrol monster cards, because you are only playing a certain amount, because they actually don't really have that many monsters. This is literally all of the monsters that they have in the main deck, and just giving them additional ways to disrupt, considering that they don't really end on too much themselves. Maybe like 2 disruptions total in archetype if you open like a really explosive hand. So the Runics will give you a lot more ways to actually do stuff to your opponent. And because of this, we are playing Word Breakers over any conventional hand traps with 3 Droplet, also a really, really good card in this deck, not just for the Runics, but because it does trigger your Plunder Patrols, 2 Triple Tactics talent to draw additional cards most of the time, but also for the other effects being super great, and 3 Evenly Matched because, let's face it, it's evenly matched. That is it for the main deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 Blackbeard, the Plunder Patrol Captain. It requires 2 monsters, including a Plunder Patrol with down left and down right arrows, and at quick effect, you can target an effect monster you control, special a Plunder Patrol monster from your extra deck with the same attribute as a monster your opponent controls or is in their graveyard, and if you do equip that target to it, then draw 1 card, and that is a hard once per turn. So Blackbeard is basically the most important card in the extra deck. There are so many different ways to utilize Blackbeard, mostly due to Plunder Patrol Ship Yord being able to allow you to use it on your turn if they don't hand trap you, which we will get into in a moment, but also being able to use on the opponent's turn, so being able to go like 1 on your turn, 1 on the opponent's turn, and then easily being able to utilize that same Blackbeard for that, being able to go Blackbeard on your turn, summon out from the extra deck, equip the Blackbeard, draw 1 card, and then being able to summon the Blackbeard off of something like the Plunder Patrol list after equipping to it, and then doing the effect again, drawing another card, and just continuously drawing not only into your Plunder Patrols, but also into your runic disruptions. And I feel like I might as well talk about YARR now if that is the case. YARR is the newest card for Plunder Patrol out of Photon Hypernova. Is a level 8 Pendulum Synchro, 1500 attack, and a big ass 3000 defense, and it is a pretty great card, let me tell you. I'm going to start with the monster effect first because it makes more sense to do that, and then the pendulum effect. So it does require one tuner, one or more non-tuners, so it is completely generic. And it says if your opponent specials a monster, except during the damage step, you can add a Plunder Patrol card from your deck to your hand, and then if this card is equipped with a Plunder Patrol card, you can special a Plunder Patrol from your deck. Also, you can target one Plunder Patrol card in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and if you do, place this card in your Pendulum Zone. The Pendulum effect says you can declare one attribute, return this card to the extra deck, and if you do, special a Plunder Patrol token Fiend level 4 with 0 attack and defense with that attribute to both players' fields in defense position. Now, I don't think I need to tell you why this is such an important card. Being able to easily pump this out with your tuner extenders in the deck, being able to declare something like Light for your very important Plunder Patrol ship list, or any attribute that you really want to go into any of your Plunder Patrol extra deck monsters, get this back into your extra deck for later, and giving yourself a body is so massive, because that almost guarantees a Blackbeard, especially because you're adding back a Plunder Patrol card, meaning that you can easily just get out of monsters such as a Blackbeard, Golden Hair, Black Eyes is especially a really good one to add in a grind game, and then just go into your Blackbeard, pop off, summon a list from the token you gave your opponent, and just do so much. Its genericism also makes it able to splash with so many different archetypes, which we will see when we get to the alternate sections of this deck, and there's just so much awesome stuff YARR can do. You can even leave it on the end board sometimes if you can make it a second time to get a lot of advantage by adding a Plunder Patrol card, and then specialing a Plunder Patrol monster, and then getting a lot of value that way. And it's also a very big 3000 defense, so it's going to be very hard for your opponent to out without using a removal card. Now that we've talked about like the consistency pieces, let's actually get into their disruptions. Starting off with Plunder Patrol ship Bran, basically all the Syncers are level 8, the Xyz is level 4, and the Fusion is also a level 8, though that doesn't really matter. So Bran is also generic. It says all other fiend monsters you control gain 500 attack, and you can discard a Plunder Patrol card, then target a spell or trap your opponent controls and banish it. Then you can add a Plunder Patrol monster from deck to hand, and it's only a quick effect though if it's equipped with a Plunder Patrol card. So here's where a lot of the gimmicks show up in the extra deck. You have to discard Plunder Patrol cards in order to use the effects, which makes it a little bit annoying because sometimes you don't have any left in hand unless you want to like make a smaller board and not overcommit just so you have one in hand. That's why the runic engine and stuff is so good. But it is really good to be able to not only get rid of a spell or trap, but also banishing it specifically, and then you get to add a Plunder Patrol monster from your deck to your hand, which is either really good for follow-up or for your additional Plunder Patrol disruptions on board. And that is the same for Mowerk, which I'll just go to now because it's literally just Bran, but it only banishes effect monsters instead while adding a spell or trap. Also, randomly, if a Plunder Patrol card you control be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can attach material from this card instead, but that doesn't really come up because you're not hard making this 99% of the time, because the materials will not get the effects such as Whitebeard's Special Summon or Bluebeard's Draw card, whatever, because they aren't considered sending from the Monster Zone to the graveyard, which is one of the big quarrels I have with Mowerk as a card, but it is still very good, not only because it is a monster removal, but also because it is a dark, meaning you're going to use it against a lot of really good strategies. And finally, the big kahuna Manoa Jamma, basically best boss monster in the extra deck, is Plunder Patrol ship List. It is a light that requires 2 Plunder Patrol monsters, but you're never hard fusing into this anymore. That says during the main phase quick effect, you can special a Plunder Patrol monster card from your hand or face up spell and trap zone. When your opponent activates a monster effect quick effect, you can discard a Plunder Patrol card to negate the activation, and if you do destroy it, then if it's equipped with a Plunder Patrol card, you can add a Plunder Patrol card from deck to hand. List is easily the best card in the entire extra deck, being able to not only get a negate, which is really good, of course, that also destroys, but also not requiring an equip to use it, though it does get you that extra advantage of adding any Plunder Patrol card if it is. But the best part about List for me is that you can use the Blackbeard that you use to go into it again by using the Special Summon effect. So you can easily just go Blackbeard into List on your turn, draw 1 card, and then on the opponent's turn, use List to negate something, add another Plunder Patrol card, and then use the Blackbeard again after you Special Summon it to go into something like a Mowerk or a Bran for additional disruption. And the rest of the extra deck isn't really anything special. We are playing 3 copies of Hugin because being able to discard your stuff at any point for a Fountain Search is really good, and the protection can come up, but it's also really good because it's a level 2 to go into Coral Dragon, which doesn't really come up super often because you are locking yourself into plunders a lot, and we're not really playing any level 10 sinkers or anything, so typically you're going to be going Coral Dragon into something like a Blackbeard or even something like a Yord or a Brand, depending on if you are able to pump out a second Hugin really fast, like when you go Chainlink 1 Whitebeard and then go Chainlink 2 another Runic card, summon out Hugin, use the Coral Dragon and the Hugin to go into your Yord, and then you still have the thing you summoned off Whitebeard, yada yada. Also, we're playing a Jerry because Jerry's really good. And then we have 1 SP because, let's face it, it's SP. And that is it for the main and extra, so the whole meat and potatoes of the deck. On to the alternatives, starting off with all the Plunder Patrol cards we don't play. Starting off with Emblem of the Plunder Patrol, basically just outdated equip spell. It equips with Plunder, gives a 500 attack, can't be targeted, and you can send it to the graveyard to special a Plunder from extra deck with the same attribute as a monster on the field or in the grave. And then you get to equip the monster that this was equipped to the extra deck monster. And then the equipped monster gains 500 attack because of it. So this actually used to be a very, very good card before we got cards such as Yord. And also like some of the extra extenders like Black Eyes and stuff, because it was one of the easiest ways to get out a monster from the extra deck without relying on your opponent's attributes and stuff. You could do it on your turn and then copy something in your graveyard, something that you've already used potentially, especially back when I believe there was a bunch of Plunder Patrol builds. I think there actually still is, where you just play like a bunch of hand traps and non-engine and stuff like that and try to like stall out your opponent a little bit. And this actually worked really well in combination with a card that you also used to play mostly with Foolish Burial Goods, Plunder Patrol Ship Shape Ship Shipping. And yeah, try saying that 5 times fast. So it is a normal spell that says fusion a fiend fusion from your extra using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material, and you can banish it from your grave and target a Plunder Patrol monster you control. Equip an emblem or any Plunder Patrol monster from your deck to that target. This card used to see play specifically for Emblem, or even to get something like a Redbeard out, for example, or something like that. I believe it stopped seeing play once cards like Black Eyes came out because it just kind of wasn't really necessary. I guess you could theoretically use it as an additional way to make lists, but nobody was really using it for that. They happened to use it if they drew it, and sometimes it did come up. Plunder Patrol Party just doesn't really do anything crazy. If you control a Plunder Patrol monster, draw cards equal to the number of equips you control +1, and then shuffle from your hand to the deck equal to the number of equips you control. So it's kind of like a Phantasme or a Saryuja, but bad. And then also, if you special a Plunder while this card's in your grave, you can equip this card to the special monster, and it gives a 500 attack like Emblem. Doesn't really do much because you're not really focusing on the equip gimmick, and so you'd rather not play this, especially when the Runics are already drawing you cards. We also have Pride of the Plunder Patrol, which is a continuous trap that says if your Plunder monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, draw a card. If you control a Plunder monster, you can send this card from your field to the grave, then either make your opponent draw 1 card, and then look at their hand and send 1 monster from it to the grave, or look at your opponent's extra deck and send 1 monster from it to the graveyard. It's just like a whole lot of nothing, really, on a trap card that you'd rather get booty if you are searching a trap card. For the non-Plunder Patrols, we have the Punk package as a very, very solid option instead of the Runic package in this deck. I actually do have a deck profile that I will try to link up in the annotation in the top right, where I actually put together Punk Plunder Patrol right after Yord was released in Photon Hypernova. I didn't really get a chance to take it to a tournament because I ended up having to get rid of it to afford a different core that I wanted to build at the time, but it is a very solid strategy due to Xiamen and E-Telly and stuff like that, plus any Plunder Patrol card period being a full combo due to Foxy Tune discarding a Plunder Patrol card, going into Yord using your Deer Note and such, and then being able to use the Yord, add back the card you discarded, make a token, use the token and the Xiamen you summoned off Deer Note, go into Blackbeard, and then you just get to pop off with so many like unimaginable plays, and you still are able to use your normal summon if you opened E-Telly. You also just get a different extension, you can get different synchro plays such as Psychic and Punisher with your level 8 synchros plus Xiamen. There's just a bunch of different really cool things that you can do with the deck. Another very popular Plunder Patrol engine is Adventurer. Water Enchantress is a water, doesn't really matter too much to be fair, but being able to get that Omni to prevent important hand traps such as Nibiru from hitting you feels pretty good. It's also just an additional disruption, and you can also use the Fateful Adventure to discard additional Plunder Patrol monsters from your hand to trigger their effects. I've seen some people talking about the Labyrinth engine in this deck, and personally, I actually haven't seen anything about it, so anyone that plays the Labyrinth Plunder Patrol build or knows anything about it, let me know down in the comments below. Is the synergy really that good? There's also also the Fiendsmith package, which I think people are talking about is like the best engine for it now. I only really am comfortable with the runic engine though, and only am aware of it being like super solid. So again, anyone playing the Fiendsmith engine, can you vouch, is this actually the best engine for Plunder? I would assume so, because it focuses on fiends and it's the Fiendsmith engine and it's super broken. Also, this card isn't out yet, but we also have A Bao A Chu, the Lightless Shadow, as an option you can play. You can probably cut the third Hugin for it. This is just a very solid link 4 that you can make really natively due to including fiend monsters as material, and then being able to discard cards to trigger your Plunder Patrol effects and then get removal, or special back something like a Liss if you summoned it properly. Actually, now that I think about it, it doesn't count as a proper summon, so you can't do that. But I guess a Mowork if you summoned it properly, or anything like that can be pretty cool. You can actually summon back an SP Little Knight now that I think about it, which is cool. And then being able to draw cards and then recycle them, kind of like what Party does, but actually, you know, good. Being able to do that and then maybe see some good runic cards or see some Plunder extension is really solid as well. So Dipsy Fiend is actually a card that the only reason it's not in here probably is because I literally just found out about it like a week ago. I was like, holy shit, this seems very, very good in Plunder Patrol. It feels like it was made specifically for Plunder Patrol. Being able to discard a card, trigger your Plunder Patrol cards, declare an attribute, accept water, special it to your, either field, and then if you give it to your opponent, you can give them like a light, meaning that you don't have to go into Yord to give them something to make Liss or any of your other dudes. So that's pretty cool. It does shut you out of the runic package, but you can always do it earlier, and I would assume this is a very, very important card in basically any other version of the deck. And then finally, the Bahamut Shark Toad package was very popular in this deck for a good while, because, I mean, let's face it, these are all level 4 waters. I'm assuming mostly because the extra deck is pretty full, you don't really play in a build like this, and also, again, like I had a problem with Mowork, being able to use a Bahamut Shark to detach is cool in a deck like Atlantean, where you can trigger your effects, but not so much in Plunder Patrol, where your effects don't get to go off. Not to mention you are getting locked a lot of the time, and the Adventure engine probably just fulfills the Toad package a lot better, and the runics just give you so much advantage that you don't really need to compensate for things like Nibiru half the time if you at least have Fountain access with a runic in hand. Oh boy, I am out of breath for not taking a breath and like stopping to slow down in the last like 20 minutes. But that is going to do it for the deck list and the alternatives. I'm going to go ahead and show y'all some replays to really see what this deck can do, and I'll see you when they're done. And that is it for the replays I gathered for this deck. Keep in mind that for Sleeper Sunday, I typically try and gather the replays in a live stream, which you can see the full unedited VOD for up in the annotation, but try and stop by sometime. They are pretty damn fun. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start delving into the strengths. Despite the lock, the simple activation condition of their effects makes them fairly splashable with many archetypes, like I discussed in the side options. Runic being used as the example here, of course. This especially extends to any Fiend and Water strategies, with more and more coming out allowing for future splashability as well. Their ability to focus on attributes for their playstyle makes them pretty flexible, as they'll almost always have at least some form of boss monster to put out, and you do have plenty of ways to get into them on the opponent's turn. If they're playing many attributes too, you can hit them with the elements of surprise sometimes, having multiple different ships at your disposal. And finally, the summon conditions of one of their boss monsters is actually super generic, with Blackbeard only requiring one of the monsters be a Plunder, and all but Liss being entirely generic to make, meaning that the splashability of the deck is actually significantly boosted in this regard as well, and you won't necessarily struggle to make a lot of your bodies. But of course, with every strength there is at least one weakness. Starting off with, while the gimmick of using your opponent's attributes is pretty nifty, it can end up falling flat on its face sometimes. For example, what if your opponent is playing a fire deck but doesn't care about using any back row? Brand becomes effectively useless and you won't have other real options to go into. This makes Yord insanely important, and that's really hard to do going second especially. One of the biggest problems I've noticed is keeping consistent Plunder cards in hand for the disruption effects. Sure, they replace themselves when the effect is used, but it can be played around at times by removing the target early. Take the Malice game that I showed as an example, and doesn't always feel reliable at all. It's hard to keep both Plunder cards in hand and use them as disruption fuel on the opponent's turn. And finally, their extension seems really good on paper, but can fall short very quickly in practice. Unless you have exactly Golden Hair or Whitebeard, your best play is using Bluebeard or Black Eye's extension to make Blackbeard and pass. So how are we making Plunder Patrol better? Well, first, I don't think I needed to say it, but adding a wind ship would in fact help the deck in certain niche matchups. In terms of effect, maybe slap something like a booty effect on it to change the attributes of something, followed by a search. I'm huge on Yord being a consistency piece as opposed to a disruption, so having the wind ship do something similar would also be pretty neat. I'd also like to see more worthwhile uses of the equip mechanic in the deck. As it stands, it almost feels forced? It's already one thing to have to rely on attributes for your boss monsters, but the disruptions aren't even quick effects unless they're equipped with a guy. I wouldn't mind seeing a card, hell, maybe even the wind ship itself having an effect that simply equips itself from grave to a guy, kinda like what Celestine Wagtail does as material for Lyrilusk monsters. You'd have consistent fodder for your disruptions equip-wise without feeling super bloated by giving them effects in the back row or anything. It would also at least make Black Eye's effect to special them from the back row much more useful. Finally, and hear me out on this one, give them a circular, like word for word, bar for bar, circular. Dumps Golden Hair from deck, hits the board, adds a Plunder spell or trap when another Plunder hits. Like, give them circular or at least something very similar. It would help their extension issue by making Golden Hair live immediately, give them shipyard or booty access much easier, or at least give you fodder for a ship, and it lets you keep your normal summon for something like Whitebeard or Redbeard. I know it's a bit bloated and kinda cliche to just slap a circular into any deck and go, wow, it's fixed, but I believe this archetype is one of the ones that can benefit the most from it. But with that being said, that's really all we can say about Plunder Patrol, especially this Plunder Patrol Runic build. It actually ended up being one of the stronger decks that we played on the series. I figured it would be, but we got some really good matchups into a lot of really strong decks. I mean, you saw me just completely, like, curb stomp that Snake Eyes player, and even Malice didn't really stand much of a chance, even though it was clearly not a super optimal Malice build, like, who's unironically playing Soul Absorption. I think that with a little bit of tweaking here and there, and, like, maybe one wave of like 2 or 3 cards of support, I think Plunder can be on its way to being a very, very strong deck and a pretty decent meta threat as long as, you know, your opponent doesn't activate Dimension Shifter. But I don't know, that's just my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below, because that's gonna do it for the video. If you like it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended, and like content more like it, like the rest of my Sleeper Sundays, and then perhaps consider subscribing and turning your notifications if you haven't already, because it supports your channel or anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also remember that for Sleeper Sunday, you can always check out the poll once a month on the community tab. I'm going to try, I promise, to bring out monthly Sleeper Sundays once again, and if you want to be able to choose the decks that go into the polls more frequently, guaranteed, then be sure to check out my Patreon $5 tier. I also have a $1 tier for other benefits, but the $5 tier is where you can suggest decks for Sleeper Sunday and guarantee their access into the poll. If you also want to spring directly way to get some awesome TCG merchandise in the process, check out Tapio Cards, the link down below. Use code AURORA5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout and to support me financially. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.